You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Episode 67, Speaking Catalan and Argentine Spanish. Hello, language lovers. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Speaking Tongues, the podcast and conversation with multilinguals. My guest this week is Matias, a hyperpolyglot who speaks over 12 languages, and he talks to me today about Catalan and Spanish spoken in his native Argentina. In this episode, Matias tells us how a chance encounter through basketball led him on the path to learning Catalan. He talks about growing up in a monolingual home, but tells us how he has been able to learn all of his languages. Matias shares what being a hyperpolyglot means to him, and we even talk about Rioplatense Spanish and the influence that indigenous language in Argentina has had on Spanish spoken in the country. Big thank you to Matias for sharing your journey with us. If you enjoy this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Speaking Tongues podcast on Apple Podcasts, or like and subscribe on YouTube so that other language learners like ourselves can find the show. And if you've been a longtime listener of the show or even a recent listener, you can now support the show on buymeacoffee.com. Links to all platforms are in the show notes. Okay, let's chat. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm joined today by Matias. How are you today, Matias?
Oh, fine, thanks. For me, El, it's the greatest honor to share with you guys the amazing world of languages, cultures, and communication.
I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language, and which languages have you learned to speak?
Well, my first language is Spanish, as I was born and raised here in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And right now I can speak 12 languages from conversational level of words and other 4 or 5 languages at the basic level. I can speak Spanish native, then I have C1 in English, C1 in Catalan, C1 in Portuguese, and B2 in Italian. Those 4 languages I can speak fluently.
Wow.
Later, at an intermediate level, I can speak B1 in French, B1 in Romanian, and maybe B1 in Galician. Later, at a conversational level or somewhat colloquial level, I can speak A2 in Greek, A2 in Turkish, A2 in Hebrew, and between A1 and A2 in German and Dutch. And more like a very basic level, I am exploring Polish, Croatian, and right now I'm studying Macedonian.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very impressive. So
Thank you.
what in your life led you to wanting to speak all of these languages and wanting to learn all of these languages?
Well, first of all, I began to study English when I was 9 years old, and extracurricular course in parallel to my primary school. But also, you know, what does it mean, the RP, British pronunciation that everybody learns here as school curricula.
Yeah.
But later on, when I was teenager, watching movies, reading, and talking to native speakers like you, and also, but also I began. I have a minor degree in computer systems, so that technical English required to read device manuals and computer stuff and programming. And I'm a I used to work as a freelance webmaster during 10 years. And from 2006 to 2009, I met in a party a Catalan guy married with an Argentine woman. When we began a small business, specializing in search engine optimization and also developments, a little bit e-commerce, but technology at that time. And we used to use Catalan as a working language.
Mm.
And the most, I mean, the very weird story about how did I learn Catalan. Because when I met my former commercial partner, I um, I had some knowledge of Catalan, and that began in the year 2002. I
Okay.
met in 2002. I met in the old MIRC, MIRC, multiple internet relay chat, in a cyber cafe. I met in a cyber cafe 16-year-old guy from Hospitalet de Llobregat, Sergi. He was studying the equivalent of junior high school, and he was playing basketball at the junior team of Hospitalet. And as we began the friendship as we shared the common interest of basketball. Later on, I realized that he had uh, some of orthographic errors when he tried to write to me in Spanish. Up up to that point, I realized. I mean, I didn't realize that there were people residing in Spain with Spanish citizenship that never or almost never use Catalan in their daily lives.
Mm-hmm.
So as I had, Sergi, in a moment, in a moment, while chatting, asked me without any commitment, without any compromise, to that he if he can write me in Catalan. I realized that he had orthographic errors while writing me in Spanish. Okay, may I write in Catalan? He asked me. So surprisingly, as I had at that time an average level of Italian, not the level that I have, but somewhat conversational level in Italian and a very basic French, that was the base, that was the ground to begin to learn Catalan. I mean, almost by accident, for every line of chat, I began to associate word roots in real time,
Mm.
from some words similar to French, some words similar to Italian, and then I could learn Catalan in 6 weeks.
Wow.
I achieved a B1 level in Catalan in 6 weeks. Well, later, Italian and French I learned while watching La Rai, Radio Televisión Italiana, or TV5, just watching the Italian and French TV. The same occurs with Portuguese. When I learned watching Brazilian TV channels or watching the Radio Televisión Portuguesa, the same occurs with Televisión de Galicia, in Galician, very similar to Portuguese. And then, in that sense, well, as Romance language, I could learn really as Spanish is my first language. Romanian, well, I knew in a New Year's Eve party from the aunt of a former girlfriend, the New Year's Eve 2015, 2016. A Romanian girl in a couple with his Argentinian couple. That Romanian girl, Alina, taught me Romanian. Well, she finished his degree in architecture at Universidad La Sapienza de Roma, but he was teaching Italian and Romanian as private lessons for surviving here. Well, in that, I asked for, you can teach me Romanian? And in 15 lessons in 4 months, I achieved a B1 level. In fact, as she lived relatively close to my home, 10 blocks away to my home, okay, it took me I could learn Romanian very quick. And in fact, as she lived 15 years in Italy, from the 5th lesson, we began to use Italian as the vehicular language. I was taking Romanian lessons in Italian.
Okay.
I took 8-month Greek lessons from April to December 2018. Later, I changed to Turkish from December 2018, March 2019. Later, I went back into Greek. I tried to prepare my A2 international exam, where I failed due to the written production. But I can still speak A2 in Greek, and well, of course, Hebrew, because I'm Jewish, and I learned in partly by in preparation for my bar mitzvah, and then later on, I made an Ulpan course in 2011 and some private teachers, and talking with some Israeli friends, I can improve from A1 to A2 level.
So, when you were growing up, what languages did you hear spoken in your home?
Well, my parents, Ruben and Isabel, as well as my younger sister Sabrina, are monolingual in Spanish. However, they have a very marginal knowledge of English, maybe A1, and of course, within my family, those Yiddish words that makes our Jewish identity. My middle brother Nicolas, who lives in Mexico since 2008. He's a Mexican citizen. He's a dancer and choreographer. Speaks
Wow.
excellent English.
So you didn't really have a an upbringing, I guess, or maybe in your community, you didn't really have an upbringing where you heard multiple languages spoken like in your home or maybe with your friends or at school or anything, right?
As a language learner, I permanently look for environments who can which can be multilingual or at least multicultural. I permanently look for groups of people who are akin to my interests. Among them, there are, for example, sports journalism or friends who can share my passion for
Right.
languages. For
Right.
example, I remember when I was accredited to cover the basketball World Cup 2014 in Spain, and in the zone when Argentina played in Sevilla, I remember some Greek and Filipino and French journalists and Serbian journalists, and when I, if I don't, if I cannot speak their language, I try to speak their language no matter what. Even though, for example, I don't speak Tagalog, but at least I had the diligence to tell to a Filipino colleague, "Hey, kumusta ka, kumpare? Kumusta ka, kapatid? Hey, how's going, brother?" In that sense, about to speaking other languages, no matter what, this is a key factor for wake up your curiosity. For example, it's not. I always say it's not the same to a Senegalese friend. Hey, comment ça va in French? Salute them in French rather than say Mangi Firek in Wolof. In the first case, I am telling, hey, how's going? However, in Wolof, I'm saying peace is upon you. Trying to speak in the language of my peer, no matter what, draws a smile in their heart. As you know, the famous Mandela phrase: "If you talk to others in the language he knows, it goes to his head. However, if you try to talk in the language of his native language, it goes to his heart." In that
Yeah.
in that sense, uh, trying to talk in the language of the other, no matter what, is priceless.
So I imagine that, you are what's considered a hyper polyglot, and I know you are a member of the Hyper Polyglot
Mhm.
Association. And I know, as you're saying this, and I'm thinking about, we have that in common, I think, just like trying to understand and trying to relate to people who have different cultures than ourselves and how we grew up. I also grew up in a monolingual home. Like I didn't, my family English, we only spoke in English. So I totally understand that. And I want to ask you, as far as being a hyper polyglot, um, what does that term mean to you? When you go to a party, do you say, "Hi, I'm Matias. I speak 12 languages"? Is this something that you, and I just threw out the number 12, but I'm really curious. I'm really curious about it because I notice, and this is not, I'm not trying to make a big deal about it, but I really am curious because I know there's the association of hyperpolyglots. I know that there are so many people out there who say, I speak, 12 languages, 15 languages, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's something that someone can be proud of. I think that's something that is obviously it's not a small feat. You put your time, your energy, and your understanding into being able to do this. But it makes me wonder, like, outside of the language community, how do you represent that to other people? Do you represent that to other people? Does it matter? Is it something that you just feel like, you know, you just want to shout from the rooftops that you're a hyper polyglot, or is it something that's more private to you? Is it some like what? How does it make you feel?
What does it make me feel? As the Green Lantern superhero, every power means a responsibility. Every power implies a great responsibility.
Mhm.
What does it mean? Um, Hyperpolyglots are naturally bridges of communication that understands cultures and try to gather those cultures together. I mean, as cultural bridges, as communicate, as bridges of culture, as bridges of communication, we have, at least in my opinion, I feel that when I became, when you become somebody who learns a lot of languages, implies that with that ability, you have a responsibility to express yourself better and to give the example, to be a role model. And in that sense, uh, when I found HYPIA by chance in 2018, when we were only 40 members, right now we are 201
Wow.
members. Yes. When I found HYPIA, I felt that in behind a community of weirdos who speak 6 languages or more, there are a non-profit organization that tries to um, encourage language empowerment. And when we talk about language empowerment, not only we are talking about um, the importance of learning language in order to learn a lot of cultures. We are talking about a social commitment. I feel at least that it's very important the social commitment a hyperpolyglot has to make a fair use of his or her language abilities from their local areas and from their local professions, occupations, or interests, from your local reality towards a global impact. In that sense, I feel that when I say anybody, yeah, I'm hyperpolyglot, it's not precisely a certification of polyglotism, but rather, yeah, it's not something that I show you in a party. Hey, I speak so many languages while drinking beers and I hook up. No, yeah, I know that I'm single. Yeah, I know that I'm single, but I know the pandemic it makes it difficult, but the point is, the point is that being a hyperpolyglot implies a commitment of social responsibility associated with languages, and that message I try to express within HYPIA or even though within the
Mhm.
hyperpolyglot community.
I really love that you said that because um I think, and let me just say something about what you said.
Sure.
I don't think that um hyperpolyglots are weirdos. I don't think that at all. I think that I think that is very, very cool. The reason why I asked this question, and I've asked people who also identify as hyperpolyglots on this show before, is because it means something different to everybody. And it means
Exactly.
something, if you're going to carry this label with you through your life or through your social interactions, it must mean something. And I think that there are people out there who probably think, oh, they're going to go to a party, have a quilmes, and, just, hope to hook up with someone by saying, like, oh, I speak 15 languages. But I really like what you said that because it is about social impact, it is about social interaction. And I think we live in a world right now where if I want to know what somebody says and it's a language I don't speak, I can very easily, Google Translate. I can go on Depot and just translate it and call it a day. But you're not really understanding the culture that comes with it. You're not understanding the background
Exactly,
of it.
because every language has its own nuances,
Exactly.
its own little details, and even though their gestures and their non-verbal information, you cannot really learn, internalize yourself if you don't learn the language and there's the most important of all, their culture associated with.
So I want to talk about Catalan because you learned Catalan in a very short period of time. And first of all, like why Catalan? I mean, you mentioned that you had a colleague who spoke Catalan and was having trouble communicating in Spanish, so then you started communicating in Catalan. But like after that period of time where you're working with him, what made you continue with Catalan? Was it the language? Was it the culture?
Well, it's very deep, your question. It's a very deep, a very profound question. uh, as of course we lived here in Argentina, we can, even though, communicate with each other in Spanish. However, I began to speak with him in Catalan just by you, because I get used to. In that sense, as I have the tendency I have the trend, sorry, as I have the trend to speak in the language of my peer, no matter what, as a matter of showing respect for the language and culture. um, I mean, I I have the trend to try to speak your language no matter what. Okay, if you were born in another country or in another, in a bilingual community, or you have, some affection for that language, for me it's enough motivation to begin to speak your language.
Mhm.
It's as simple as this. um,
So what ways were you able to learn it so quickly? Was it just through conversation?
well,
Did you have any tutoring or any
no. uh, Although half of my languages I learned through private lessons or through the school curricula or the, mainstream structures, the point is that maybe half or 7 or 8 languages, yeah, no, yeah, 6 or 7 languages, I learned it by autodidact, self-learning. I was self-taught. However, I didn't become self-taught in those languages, um, randomly. I mean, I became self-taught in, first of all, I became self-taught in, while learning languages, if I have if I had a previous base or a previous knowledge. I mean, I couldn't become, to be a self-taught in Catalan. At least I got a book, a reading book in Catalan. However, my previous knowledge of French and Italian, enabled me to be a self-taught and to learn that pointly that language. However, with other languages, I have a different story or a different culture, and even though a different motivation, because, for example, you can learn Italian through the opera, or you can learn French through the haute cuisine, or you can learn Japanese through anime or manga, or you have, when I say you, I'm not pointing precisely to you, but in general, uno cualquiera, exactly. You can, you have different motivations for every language, different triggers or mechanisms that activates in your brain that impulses you or motivates you to wake up your curiosity for learning that language in particular.
You mentioned that when you started learning Catalan, you had experience with Italian and experience with French. And you've said that you think those two languages have more of an influence on Catalan than Spanish does. So give me some examples of that. How
Yes,
how did you
very
how did
very
you
simple, very simple. When for example, Catalan and Spanish have in common that the verb tener have as a possession and the verb haber have as compound tenses are clearly different, and and uh, uh, and Catalan also supports null subject like Spanish. However, the weak pronouns or the pronominal system in Catalan is much similar to French and Italian, as both French and Italian, as well as Catalan, needed to mark or needed to define, I mean, direct and indirect complement, direct and indirect object with special weak pronoun markers. For example, we have in Italian ci sono cose per fare, ci sono cose a fare. And we have in Spanish hay cosas que hacer. We have in French il y a des choses à faire. But we have in Catalan il y a cosas à faire. In that sense, il y a in French is il y a in Catalan, written H-I-H-A. That H-I is equivalent this with Y in French in the sense of the weak pronoun for indirect object. For example, yo y vaig a la platja. J'y vais à la plage. Or the pronoun ne. For example, mon pare, el meu pare fa algunes coses. El meu pare en fa. Mon père mon père fait quelque chose. Mon père en fait. The same, more, it's like the same structures in Catalan and French, even though in Italian io vado alla spiaggia, io me ne vado, è lo stesso, it's the same, and in that sense, those grammar structures, in my process of learning Catalan, I reasoned that in real time 20 years ago, exactly how to decode the first import. We have hyperpolyglot two basic mechanisms. The first at all, how to decode grammar structures in real time, especially when we talk about related languages. And the second point, to memorize thousands of words of vocabulary in real time, especially associating word roots in real time. For example, when I was learning Catalan, okay, temps es igual al francés, temps es igual al francés, finestra es igual al italiano, fenêtre, finestra, euh, je vull obrir la finestra. Je vais ouvrir la fenêtre. The structure is almost the same. In that sense, that's why I found Catalan language amazing. For example, also, there are a lot of aspects of Catalan culture that paid me a lot of attention. For example, when I learned that for example, we are journalists, and so we are professionals of communications, and I realized the importance of tell a story, how to process all that information in the way that a viewer or our public in the way that he can or she can understand better, in the way that they can understand better how to tell a story in the best way, processing all that information, all that text, make it easier. And if you put images and even audio, it's better. For example, right now when we are redacting a story, when we redact a note for a website, for a journalism website, when we talk about modern storytelling, etc., etc., etc. Well, in Catalan, in 15th century, 14th, 15th century, we have an ancient tradition called aucas. Un auca, plural aucas, basically there was, you can imagine a cartoon. If you tell a story in easy words, when that story, that easy story, you transform into a poem, a poetry, and each stanza or each half stanza you associate it with an image and you tell that story sequentially. That story or that series of stories, like a tale, like a story tale, the aucas enabled illiterate peasants to explain you a breaking news, for example, or any story. They can be instructed despite not having the ability to read. Or if you memorize a poetry who explains a story or a fairy tale, and you have a sequence of images, it will be easy to learn. And that's amazing because we are not talking about 21st century. We're talking about 500, 600 years ago.
Let me switch gears for a second. Tell me about being in Buenos Aires and some of the communities that are there in Buenos Aires that are not Spanish speaking communities. I know that there's a history of immigration in Buenos Aires, and there are so many people from different ethnic backgrounds who live there and have lived there for generations. So maybe this is a two-part question, but how do you notice, and as you're familiar with so many languages, how do you notice different languages influencing the Spanish spoken in Buenos Aires?
Well, first of all, most of the Rioplatense Spanish is, of course, influenced by Italian immigrants who didn't speak precisely standard Italian, but rather the different Italian dialects that influenced most of the Argentine Spanish we speak. However, we have also the Spanish spoken in Corrientes, Chaco, and Formosa, and Misiones, who are influenced with Paraguayan Guarani.
Mm.
Even though Santiago del Estero in Central North, who was influenced by, who was influenced by Quechua. In fact, the southernmost Quechua dialect is in Santiago del Estero in Argentina. And even though the Patagonia, who has also influence from Mapudungun, from Mapuche, and other indigenous languages. However, the most extended the most extended accent about Argentine Spanish came from the Rio de la Plata, and indeed has a lot in common from Italian immigrants. Now, answering, of course, that influences in our phonology. Now, answering your other question, in Argentina, yeah, we are one of the arguably 4 or 5 countries which receive the most immigrants in proportion, um, along with United States, Canada, and Australia.
Right.
And my great grandparents came from Poland and Ukraine, but they rarely spoke Polish, Ukrainian, or Russian, but Yiddish, a Jewish German.
Mm-hmm.
My grandparents, who they passed away recently. My grandparents spoke Yiddish at his household. However, they don't transmit Yiddish to their sons,
Mm-hmm.
to my parents and uncles. Um, uh, Only maybe a bunch of words. However, it was enough for maintain our Jewish tradition, within our Jewish community. Later, I get involved into the Jewish community that I learned modern Hebrew. However, my Jewish background, my Jewish education, it wasn't formal. I never went to Hebrew schools, for example. However, I know a lot of friends or former friends who went into the Hebrew schools and then later led to immigrate to Israel. I have also family living in Israel that I can speak modern Hebrew with them very
Mm-hmm.
rarely. However, in Argentina, there's a lot of immigrant communities or regional communities, even though Casal de Catalunya, it's by excellence the institution that represents Catalan community here. Despite being Jewish and despite not being Catalan descent, I was affiliated to the Casal de Catalunya from 2006 to 2008. In
Cool.
fact, in the first party organized by the Casal de Catalunya, I met Cesar, my former commercial partner. But the point is that we have a lot of uh, immigrant centers that became non-profit organizations. However, the language courses offered in general lines, the immigration course, sorry, the language courses offered by the different immigration centers or by the different institutions that represent every immigrant community in Buenos Aires and the greater Buenos Aires normally offer courses in a range of basic and middle levels, mostly attending the needs of the local community.
Mm. Okay. As we know, Spanish is spoken all over the world in so many different countries, and it's spoken so differently in different countries. Tell me some things about Argentine Spanish that are that are different. tell me about some things that make it unique for someone who's learning Spanish and may not know about Argentine Spanish. Tell us what you know.
Well, we have a lot of specific jargon or specific terms that we developed through the Italian immigrant, through the lunfardo, through the tango, and all the and precisely and words of different origins. For example, we have a very common word here in Argentina about the word quilombo. Quilombo literally means a mess, but yeah, something messing or but quilombo or has a lot of a lot of meanings. For example, no hagas quilombo, don't screw up. Different nuances of this. Well, quilombo comes from the Portuguese or from, I mean, from Angolan, some African language from Angola that came from Brazil in the 17th century, and quilombo basically means brothel
Hmm.
or whorehouse.
Okay.
In the sense that in Brazil, in the brothels at that time, a lot of soldiers of the Portuguese army, colonial army, came into the brothel, and there were always party or always uh, inconvenience.
Mm.
In that sense, the word quilombo arrived into Argentina as a synonym of something messy or something uh, something or somebody into trouble.
Okay.
We have the word boludo,
Mm.
boludo and pelotudo. It's not only means stupid or moron. It has a lot of meanings. The origin was when the Argent sorry when the army of the province of Buenos Aires faced against Spanish army in the beginning of the 19th century, and the old gauchos faced them with very rudimentary weapons, some stones with feather sorry some stones with leather laces, or even though big stones with leather laces, or rudimentary knives with bamboos, and they faced off to in several occasions the Spanish regiment, and they blown up away. Uh, okay, a la carga, boludos, boludos, a charge.
Hmm.
Or pelotudo, a la carga, pelotudos. I mean, boludos, lanceros, pelotudos in the first, second, or free front line. Well, the term boludo meaning an idiot, or meaning something moron or something risky or daredevil, comes from 1890, more or less, in the when an Argentine member of House of Representatives explained that in the made an analogy comparing the boludos with somebody who is at great risk or daredevil. Basically
Ah.
that kind of etymology, it's very interesting among Argentine Spanish. However, the logics of our Spanish are not too much different from Latin American Spanish. For example, we have in the word pena. It means pity, but pity. I mean, the word pena. The word pena in Argentina means what a pity, but the word pena in Mexican Spanish, what a shame. Tú me das pena. It's shameful for me. So in that sense, the nuances are also important.
Mm-hmm.
Let me answer your two last questions. You are telling me about HYPIA and about the role I have in HYPIA.
Mm-hmm.
Well, HYPIA is an NGO, is a nonprofit organization whose objective is to foster and to encourage mutual human understanding through the knowledge of language and cultural diversity. It consists of people, common people like us, who are excelled in languages and who are committed to make this world a better world through their language abilities. What do we do is, what we do is to make interviews with other hyperpolyglots, showing us not only their stories about languages, but also their commitment to keep learning languages in order to make to improve communication among people. That interview, that basic interview, encouraged language empowerment. And that interview, once published in the website polyglotassociation.org, means a free life membership. The reason why the membership of HYPIA is completely for free is for ethical purposes, as we don't we don't earn money because it's we evaluate candidates in an impartial manner. Just a document of Word with 6 or 7 questions in English, an experience essay telling us a funny interview, a funny situation in English about your use of languages, no more than 1,000 words, a picture from you, and a proof of your fluency is just a short video from you speaking at least 1.5 minutes for languages, minute 6 languages. And in that sense, that interview, once uploaded, can be used in your curriculum, LinkedIn, etc., as an added value in your social networks as an added value. That's the first added value that HYPIA creates. HYPIA creates added value. Mm-hmm. But as I told you, HYPIA doesn't mean a certification of polyglotism, but rather it's social responsibility associated with languages.
I know that you are really interested in basketball, and that's one of your big interests. What are some of the connections that you find between sports and language, and how are you able to bring your love of particularly basketball? How are you able to bring your love of basketball and language together?
When I began to go to cyber cafes as early as 1997, and since then I became fanatic of basketball stats, because I always had access to basketball statistics. But what about to make a database of basketball statistics? And since then, you can imagine that from 1997 onwards, I began to access every national league from every country of the world, trying to look for basketball stats, even though from the most remote league. And if I don't speak that league, okay, I will try to pick up some words of that league, of that language, of that league, of that country. And if I don't speak that country, at least I know how to say statistic, etc. Stat, okay, at least I can find the stats. Well, those stats, I began to pick them up, and in August 2011, I could publish at half of them. I have to update them. Wordhoopstats.com, and that database was at that time the largest free basketball stats database in the world. Those stats that I must update is the greatest collection of stats I have had at that time. But from 2 years ago to now, I tripled. The amount of stats I have. What I had published in wordhoopstats.com is only the third part of what of the stats I have.
Wow.
500,000. You can imagine 800,000, 1 million different player profiles from 120 different leagues and counting. extracting those as my minor degree is computer systems. I began to pick up those stats to web crawl. I did web crawling. I reproduced those stats. Um, Saving in my computer hundreds of thousands of player profiles, being HTML or being database or being Excel sheets, or PDFs, whatever. A lot of source of information that for me is important, and I was extremely helpful, even though from the basketball sports journalism community in Argentina, and even though I have contacts in any other parts of the world, and I am one of the few or relatively few references of sport. I mean, from basketball journalists specialized specifically in basketball stats.
Wow.
And the point is that right now I'm not yet I'm not work I have never worked as a journalist, always as a systems analyst or as a programmer. But one of my dreams is to work as a sports journalist specialized in basketball stats, and especially to assist scouters or agents or representatives, or working with basketball statistics. That's my dream. I hope to fulfill it someday.
You have so many options and so many leagues you can choose from with all the languages you speak, and you can talk about write about sports anywhere in the world. Please tell us two things. Tell us how people can contact you if they want to become a member of the Hyperpolyglot Association, and tell us how we can find your basketball statistics website.
Well, my basketball stats website, worldhoopstats.com.
I'm going to add all of that into the show notes so that people who are listening and they want to get in
Sure.
touch, they'll be able to do that very quickly. Matias, thank you so much for talking with me and talking about your journey through all these languages and your love of info systems and basketball and Catalan and thank you so much for everything and for having
I'm
making the
I'm
time for this conversation. The last question that I like to ask at the end of every episode, and now this is your turn. Do you have any jokes, tongue twisters, slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in Argentine Spanish or in Catalan to share?
well. Well, I have a tongue twister in Catalan that maybe can resume what we have talked in 1 hour and a half.
Okay.
En cap, el que cap, en aquest cap.
What does it mean?
Well, the word cap in Catalan has three different meanings.
Mm,
As an adverb means no one or not or nothing. Yeah, nothing, no one, neither. It's a negative. It's a negative adverb. Cap as a noun means head,
okay.
and cap as a verb means to fit. En cap, el que cap, en aquest cap means in no head fits what it fits in my head.
Okay, let me try it. You have to say it slowly. I'm going to repeat after you. Okay?
En cap,
En
cap,
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 en cap, cap, cap,
el que cap,
el que cap,
en aquest cap.
el aquest cap.
Aquest, this,
A- Aquest
aquest,
cap.
this, exactly. En
Okay.
cap, el que cap, en aquest cap.
El cap, cap, cap.
In.
In cap, cap,
The
cap.
first cap means the first cap means No, no one, neither.
Mm-hmm.
The second cap means head. The third cap means fits.
Mm-hmm.
En ninguna cabeza cabe lo que cabe en mi cabeza en Spanish.
Okay, let me try this. En cap, 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 el que cap, en a que es cap.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much again for joining me for this conversation. Before I let you go, I know you're going to have a big pool to fish from for this very last thing, but in this situation that we've been talking for some time now, in any language that you think of, the first one that comes to your head, what would be the best way to say goodbye?
Adeu. Uh,
Adeu.
adeu es en catalán.
Perfect. It fits with the theme of this episode. Perfect. Adeu, Matias.
Adeu.
Gracias, gracias. And I'll be talking to you soon.
Muchísimas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Bye.